We sought this debate because we believe it is important for deputies to be able to outline their approach to the broad issue of water services. And if we want this debate to be useful, I think it would be constructive if deputies concentrated on outlining their own policies. This is very far from being the single most important issue facing our country. However, it is important, and the handling of it in recent years represents a dramatic public policy fiasco. It's also one of the few areas where there was a substantial policy debate during the election and a decisive result in favour of ending current policy. There has been an enormous amount of ill-informed and highly skewed coverage of this issue in recent weeks. The scale of lobbying and media briefing by a commercial state body using public money has been unprecedented, and this has distorted the debate and ensured that manifestly false claims are being made on behalf of existing policy. During the past 5 years and during the election, Fianna Fáil was clear in setting out its policy and addressing various eventualities. Many have presented distorted and superficial claims about our policies, but distorting and misrepresenting our policies has been a consistent part of why so many failed to anticipate growing public support for our party. We oppose the establishment of Irish Water and the introduction of the charge. Leaving aside the issue of the arrogant failure of the outgoing government to justify the model of a national commercial utility or to outline the actual costs involved in the administrative and charging regimes they imposed, we had other substantive problems. We do accept the need to invest in improving our water services, but to say that the existing framework is the only way you can deliver and fund this work is simply not true. The comparison with DSB is fatuous. DSB does not require state subvention. It is a genuinely commercial firm, albeit providing a vital public service. More importantly, DSB does not demand that you pay them for years before they can guarantee an acceptable service. The outgoing government's policy was to allow Irish Water massive commercial freedom, even though it would be funded primarily by direct state subvention and would take many years to bring services to the level they themselves define as acceptable. Irish Water is very far from being the accepted model of water service provision and development internationally. Northern Ireland and Scotland are very much the exceptions in Europe. Comparable countries to Ireland managed to deliver major water infrastructure developments without a commercial utility like Irish Water, as it's now constituted. A service delivered with ongoing public investment should most properly be delivered by state agencies. Had Irish Water been a state agency from the outset, the uncontrolled expansion of management, the bonus culture, the waste, the secrecy, the one-third million spent on polling, the massive and rising payments for lobbying, and many other practices would not have been possible. And equally, the disdain for democratic accountability would never have been allowed. The consistent claim for Irish Water was that this was the only way of raising the funding required for investment. And this is simply false. In fact, the commercial state firm has reduced potential funding for investment. Not only has Irish Water's investment programme failed to be taken out of government borrowing figures, there is no plan on the table from anyone which shows how this could happen. Commentators who say that we're facing a choice between off-balance sheet borrowing and public funding need to go and look at the facts. There are no proposals from anyone which shows how Irish Water could potentially ever meet the arm's-length borrowing test of Eurostat. So please, let's hear no more of the nonsense that water services will be deprived of funding unless current policy continues. And that's a key point. If you look at the financial frameworks of the Fine Gael party over the next 5 years, or of any party over the next 5 years, it actually envisages Irish Water funding on balance sheet, not off balance sheet. And that's something that's been confirmed to us in more recent times. The entire case for Irish Water and the investment figures published has been based on putting spin first. Far more time and money has been spent on co-opting the support of commentators than on ensuring that the policy stands up to scrutiny. And in the context of Daphne Coveney's speech and others, I think we must make the general point as well that in the decade prior to the establishment of Irish Water, from 2000 to 2010, 5.5 billion was invested in water services. And per annum, more money was spent on water infrastructure in the 3 years prior to the establishment of Irish Water than actually in the 3 years in the years since. That's a fact. So the idea, and Irish Water fostered this, and don't get me wrong, there's huge challenges, there's huge needs for investment, but the idea that nothing was done, that everything was medieval for decades, and high presto, in a magical moment, you create a new body and everything is changed, wonderfully so. It's not that simple, and it never was. People talk about sewage outflows and so on. One of the biggest sewage treatment projects ever carried out was carried out nearly 20 odd years ago by the 2 councils in Cork in terms of the main drainage system and right out to the wastewater treatment plant below in Little Island. So a lot of mythologies grew up about this too, and we need to be realistic about all of that and stop trying to sell the idea that everything was a disaster beforehand and everything is going to be fantastic afterwards. That's not the way life works, and we all know that. Conservation and quality are core objectives for water policy. And this is where the funding and the priority should have been, rather than on constructing a metering and charging regime which is profoundly wasteful. There should have been a cost-benefit analysis before 500 million was poured into the ground. There should have been, in advance. By Irish Water's own estimation, the fixing of elements of the supply system is the single most important element of conservation and quality improvement. On the matter of charges specifically, we believe that there is no basis for asking the Irish people to pay a regressive direct charge which is at present marginal to achieving conservation and quality objectives. Unlike and on that point, Irish Water right now isn't net. I'd say you're looking at something below 50 million net if you're taking out the water conservation grant of 100 million and the 61 compliance and so on like that. So there is no huge current revenue at all coming in at the moment under the existing model. Unlike others, our position is that you don't get to pick and choose what lawful payments you make. What is lawfully owed should be paid. As Democrats, it's up to us to use legitimate democratic means to change policies. And this is exactly what I have said repeatedly when questioned on this topic before, during and after the election. On the issue of a constitutional referendum on public ownership, we are fully supportive of a stand against privatisation. There is, however, a need for all advocating such a referendum to explain how it would work. How would it be proposed to give constitutional status to a service which is not universal, for example? What about water services not provided directly by state agencies? We've had enough of water policy being made up on the hoof by the outgoing government that we don't need to spend years on something which is all about sound bites over substance. Clearly, detailed work would be required in exploring such an option. In the meantime, moving Irish Water on a pathway to effectively becoming a state agency is the most effective and pragmatic way of copper fastening the public ownership issue. Nobody here has been given the mandate to dictate policy or to tell others what their mandate represents. We've had too much of that in recent weeks. And I believe that the legitimate place for the future of water policy to be settled is here in Dáil. And the talks that we are engaged in, and they're not concluded yet, provides effectively for that. We're not denying anybody any inputs. The fundamental point will be that the future of water policy will be decided by this Dáil, not the last Dáil, not the policies of the last Dáil, but the inputs of this Dáil and all parties, either through a Oireachtas committee that is proposed to be formed, subsequent to a Commission's recommendations. And that means, effectively, that water charges can only, after they're suspended by legislation, can ever only come back by the will of the Dáil. And given that a majority of the Dáil have been elected on a position that they're opposed to water charges, I think there's fairly clear implications of all of that. And I think what we've been trying to do is deal with this decisively in advance of the formation of a minority government, so that that minority government, in the public interest, and the public do want a government formed, has some chance of dealing with the major issues of this country without it being consistently undermined by an issue that would not be resolved in advance of the formation of a government. And we're an opposition party that will facilitate the formation of that government, but we want to make sure it has some chance of sustainability in the future. And I would say that the first thing we have to do, as should have been done 5 years ago, is to have an independent report on key elements of water policy. Let's then debate it. And those who believe that the current model of provisional funding is the only possible way can make their case, and let them seek to persuade others and the Irish people. We welcome the fact that Fine Gael acknowledges the new reality and may agree a suspension of charges. They would be free to argue and vote for the recommencement of charges after the suspension, and equally we and others would be free to argue and vote for the non-imposition of charges during this Dáil term. I would encourage that other deputies to put aside your fake outrage and distorting spin for the rest of this debate. The policy we are committed to for the Dáil remains a scrapping of the commercial state firm, no charges for at least the duration of this Dáil, and a major national investment programme in developing this public service.
Thank you.